She thought I was an intruder until I pulled out my police chief badge. Damon Price, a 45-year-old recently appointed police chief of Maple Grove, had spent his entire career serving others. After a tough divorce, he finally bought his dream home in Oakland Estates, a quiet, upscale neighborhood just beginning to diversify. For Damon, it was more than a house. It was a symbol of peace earned after decades of sacrifice. With a private pool tucked behind a tall cedar fence, his backyard had become a small sanctuary where he could unwind from the pressures of public service. Most neighbors greeted him with cautious politeness or warm nods, except for Karen Delaney. The HOA president, Karen, seemed to treat Damon's presence as a personal affront. She nitpicked everything from the color of his garden lights to the way his lawn stripes leaned. Her 18-year-old son, Zack, was even worse, an entitled recent graduate who sped around the neighborhood in a brand-new Audi, often throwing judgmental looks Damon's way. From the moment Damon moved in, it was clear that, to the Delaneys, he didn't fit their idea of who belonged in Oakland Estates. But it wasn't until one blazing summer afternoon that things really escalated, and karma came calling. It was one of those blistering June afternoons where the heat shimmered off the pavement, and the only sensible plan was a cold beer and a dip in the pool. Damon had just finished mowing his lawn, a ritual he found oddly meditative, and was now reclining in a lounge chair beside the turquoise water of his private backyard oasis. Smooth jazz played softly through a waterproof speaker as he took a long sip from a chilled can of beer, soaking in the peace he'd worked so hard to earn. But the serenity shattered with the sharp click of the side gate swinging open. Damon straightened slightly, expecting maybe a delivery or a neighbor needing something urgent. Instead, he saw Zack Delaney, shoulders squared, chin high, striding into his yard like he owned the place. Trailing awkwardly behind him was a girl Damon didn't recognize, who looked like she very much wished she were anywhere else. Damon rose halfway out of the pool, brows furrowing as he called out, "Can I help you?" Zack didn't answer right away. Instead, he glanced around with a sneer of disapproval before pointing at the pool. "You need to get out," he said, his tone smug and dismissive. "This is a private pool. The Hendersons are out of town. You're trespassing." Damon blinked, water dripping down his face. "Actually," he said, voice even but firm, "I bought this house from the Hendersons 4 months ago. This is my home, and that," he gestured to the pool, "is my pool." Zack's smirk didn't fade. "Right, I know everyone in this neighborhood, and I've never seen you before. My mom's the HOA president. Trust me, I would know if the Hendersons sold this place." The girl, Lily, Damon would later learn, shifted uncomfortably, tugging lightly at Zack's arm. "Maybe we should just go," she murmured, but Zack shrugged her off. "No," he snapped. "This guy's lying. Probably broke in or something. I've been checking on the Henderson house all week. I know it's empty." Damon moved to the steps and climbed out of the water, not out of fear, but out of principle. He grabbed his towel and wrapped it around his waist, dripping wet and composed. "I don't know what you think you're doing," he said calmly, "but you're trespassing right now, and I suggest you leave before this goes any further." Zack's eyes narrowed. "You think you can talk to me like that? In my neighborhood?" He stepped closer, puffing out his chest. "You'll be sorry you messed with me. My mom runs this place. My dad's a lawyer." Damon took a slow breath, watching the boy's bravado turn into something more dangerous. Lily looked mortified. She opened her mouth to say something, but Zack was already pulling out his phone. "You're gonna regret this," he said with venom. "You'll see." Damon didn't flinch. He'd seen this kind of entitlement before, but rarely so close to home. Zack's arrogance escalated from smug to hostile in a heartbeat. "You're trespassing," he declared, pointing an accusing finger at Damon. "You broke into this house. I should call the cops right now." His voice rose, fueled more by performance than conviction. Damon didn't raise his own voice. He didn't have to. "Actually, you're the one trespassing," he said, calm but firm. "And for the record, there are security cameras covering every inch of this property. So whatever story you're about to tell won't hold up against video evidence." Zack scoffed, but faltered for a beat, then puffed himself up again and stepped forward, clearly trying to intimidate. "I don't care what you say. I know this house. I know the Hendersons. You don't belong here, and you're probably trying to rob the place. Lily's discomfort turned to alarm as she watched Zack push the confrontation further. Damon, still wrapped in his towel, stood unmoved. You're making a mistake, he warned, but Zack wasn't listening. No, you made the mistake, Zack barked back, and then, without warning, he shoved Damon in the chest. It wasn't enough to knock him over, but the moment Zack laid hands on him, the energy shifted. Damon's jaw tightened, but his composure remained intact. He slowly reached for his phone on the patio table, unlocked it, and spoke clearly into the receiver. This is Chief Damon Price requesting a patrol unit at 219 Oakland Drive. No lights or sirens. It's a non-emergency, just need some backup for a trespassing incident. The words hung in the air like a thunderclap. Zack blinked. Wait, what did you just say? Damon didn't reply. Instead, he turned the phone toward them just as a Ring doorbell notification flashed on the screen. Damon Price, front door delivery, 219 Oakland Drive. Lily's eyes widened as the truth hit her. Zack! This is his house, she whispered. But Zack doubled down, refusing to let go of the narrative he had wrapped himself in. No, he snapped. He could have stolen that phone. I don't know what kind of scam this is, but I'm calling my mom. With shaking hands, Zack pulled out his phone and dialed. Mom, he said, breath quickening, there's some black guy in the Hendersons' pool. Says he lives here, but he's obviously lying. I think we've got a situation. Damon raised an eyebrow but said nothing. It was a scene he'd witnessed many times in his career, just never in his own backyard. As Zack's voice spilled with urgency, the entitlement, ignorance, and racial bias layered into his every word became impossible to ignore. And all the while, Lily stood in stunned silence, now clearly realizing this was no misunderstanding. This was a full-blown lie crashing into the truth, and the truth had evidence, authority, and a badge. Karen Delaney stormed through the side gate like a Category 5 hurricane, dressed in crisp white capri pants. A powder blue HOA polo shirt emblazoned with the Oakland Estates logo, and oversized designer sunglasses perched atop her blonde bob like a crown. She didn't ask questions or look around. She just pointed an accusatory finger at Damon and launched into her tirade. What do you think you're doing? She barked. This is private property. You need to leave immediately before I have you arrested. Damon didn't flinch. Calmly, he stepped aside and gestured toward one of the visible security cameras mounted under the eaves. We can review the footage together if you'd like, he said, his voice low and even. Karen ignored the offer and turned to Zack, who was standing nearby with his arms crossed, looking falsely emboldened by his mother's arrival. Tell them what happened, Karen demanded. This man broke into the Hendersons' house and threatened you, didn't he? Zack nodded quickly. He came at me first. I was defending myself, he added, voice trembling with manufactured outrage. Damon raised an eyebrow but said nothing as two uniformed officers arrived through the gate, clearly expecting something else. Chief, one of them asked, blinking in surprise, everything okay here? Karen's mouth dropped open. Chief, she repeated, stunned, you're telling me he works for the police? Damon folded his arms across his chest. I don't just work for them, I run the department. Karen's face flushed crimson, but she wasn't ready to back down. That can't be. You threatened my son. He's only 18. This is harassment of a minor. Damon turned toward the officers and said, Would you mind reviewing the security footage I just pulled up? He handed over his phone and the officers silently watched the recording. Zack entering the yard without permission, Damon calmly addressing him, the escalating confrontation, and finally, Zack pushing Damon without provocation. Lily, who had been standing silently, visibly shaken, finally spoke up. Mrs. Delaney, Zack knew this wasn't the Hendersons' house, she said, her voice shaking. He told me we could swim here because the owners were in Europe and no one would notice. He lied. Karen turned on her. Excuse me? But Lily pressed on, her voice steadier now. He said the guy who lives here was probably some renter and wouldn't do anything. He planned to come in. The silence that followed was deafening. The officers exchanged a glance, and one of them looked at Zack. Son, you just admitted to knowingly trespassing on private property, and we have you on video putting your hands on the homeowner. Zack's confidence began to crack. I didn't mean to. I thought... You thought wrong, Damon interjected, "and now that the truth is on record, I suggest we stop the lies here." Karen looked around, eyes darting from face to face, clearly scrambling for control. But the damage was done. The story she and her son had built was unraveling, undone by evidence, eyewitnesses, and the cold clarity of the truth. Despite having every right to press charges for trespassing and physical assault, Damon chose not to escalate the matter legally, at least not yet. Standing tall in front of everyone, he looked Zack in the eye and said, "You owe me an apology for coming onto my property and putting your hands on me. You may not like who lives in this house now, but that doesn't give you the right to treat people like they don't belong." Zack hesitated, glancing nervously at the officers, and then mumbled a reluctant, barely audible apology. Damon turned to Karen next. "And as for you, Mrs. Delaney," he said calmly, "I expect you to acknowledge that this is my home, and that I have every right to be here." Karen stiffened. "Fine," she muttered through gritted teeth. "You're a resident." But she refused to apologize, clinging to the last scraps of her authority like a badge. Damon didn't push further. Instead, he delivered a different kind of blow. "I'll be joining the HOA's security committee," he announced, his voice clear and measured. "It's time we take a closer look at who has access to gate codes, community property, and how funds are allocated. Transparency should benefit everyone in this neighborhood, not just a few." The message landed like a quiet explosion. Karen's expression darkened, but she said nothing as the officers wrapped up their report and escorted her and Zack off the property. Damon returned to his patio, towel still draped over his shoulder, and sat back down as if nothing had happened. But the ripple effects had only just begun. 2 days later, in a move that surprised no one but amused many, Karen showed up at the Maple Grove Police Department, demanding to file a formal complaint against Damon. With dramatic flair, she clutched a manila folder and told the front desk assistant that the police chief had caused emotional distress to her son. She insisted that Zack was traumatized, unable to sleep, and felt targeted by Damon's aggressive presence. When word of her complaint reached Damon, he invited her into his office without hesitation. Calm as ever, he opened a copy of the incident report and laid out the timeline. Video footage of Zack entering his yard uninvited, the verbal exchange, the shove, Lily's eyewitness account, and the officer's direct observations, all neatly documented. "Are you sure you want to proceed with this?" Damon asked, raising an eyebrow. "Because if you file a formal complaint, all this becomes part of the public record, and I will respond accordingly." Karen faltered, flipping through the file as the weight of reality began to sink in. Every page, every statement, every frame of footage dismantled the version of events she was trying to push. She tried to pivot. "This isn't personal," she said weakly. "It's just, people are nervous. There's been too much change lately, too fast." Damon didn't respond with anger, just quiet clarity. "Change isn't the problem," he said. "The problem is pretending some people don't belong just because they don't look like the last family who lived there." Karen stood, folder clenched tightly, and left without another word. For Damon, the matter was far from over. But now it was on his terms. The emergency HOA meeting was standing room only, the air thick with anticipation as residents filled the community center, eager to witness the fallout of what had quickly become the most talked-about incident in Oakland Estates. Karen, still clinging to her crumbling authority, took the floor with a strained smile and began by declaring that Damon Price's residency was in question due to a supposed failure to register properly with the HOA. Gasps rippled through the crowd, but before she could elaborate, Mr. Hector Martinez, the HOA treasurer and longtime resident, stood up, clearing his throat. "Actually, that's not accurate," he said, holding up a file. "Chief Price submitted his residency application in January. It was reviewed, signed, and fully approved by the board in February. And yes, Mrs. Delaney, your signature is right here on the approval form." Karen blinked, visibly shaken as Martinez continued. "Moreover, his HOA dues have been paid in full and on time every month." Murmurs spread through the room as people turned to look at Karen, her credibility unraveling by the second. Then another board member, Lisa McGraw, raised a separate concern. "While reviewing HOA expenses, I noticed we've been making regular payments to a pool maintenance company, For services at 221 Oakland Drive, she said. That's Chief Price's address. And as we all know, that pool is privately owned. It's not community property. The room fell silent. Why are HOA funds being used for a private residence? She asked bluntly. Martinez nodded in agreement and pulled out another folder. That question bothered me too, he said, so I dug deeper. Turns out the part-time technician assigned to that particular service is, surprise, Zack Delaney. A wave of stunned silence spread as the implication became clear. Karen had been funneling HOA funds to pay her own son for servicing a private pool he had no business accessing, all under the guise of community maintenance. Karen's face turned a shade of pale pink, her mouth opening and closing without sound. This is absurd, she finally managed. There must be a misunderstanding. But the damage was done. Residents began voicing their outrage, demanding accountability. The board acted swiftly. In a unanimous vote, Karen was removed as HOA president effective immediately, pending a full financial audit of all HOA expenditures under her tenure. Zack's arrangement with the pool company was terminated on the spot, and the contract flagged for review. Then, in a rare moment of unity, the board issued a formal apology to Damon Price, publicly acknowledging the wrongful accusations, the abuse of HOA resources, and the broader harm caused to both him and the integrity of the community. Damon, who had sat quietly near the back throughout the meeting, simply nodded when his name was mentioned. He hadn't come to gloat. He came to ensure the truth had its day. And it had. As the meeting adjourned and neighbors trickled out, many approached Damon to shake his hand, thank him, or simply express their embarrassment over how he had been treated. Change had finally arrived in Oakland Estates. Not because it was easy, but because it was necessary. 3 weeks later, a letter arrived in Damon Price's mailbox. This time, not another passive-aggressive HOA violation notice, but a handwritten note of gratitude from Evelyn Chen, the newly elected HOA president and a retired district attorney. In her message, she thanked Damon for his patience, integrity, and for handling the situation with a level of professionalism that set the tone for real reform within the community. Along with the letter came an official invitation. Damon was asked to lead the HOA's Security and Ethics Committee, a position created in the aftermath of the scandal to increase transparency and oversight. Elsewhere in Oakland Estates, quiet changes were happening. The Delaney family had quietly listed their house for sale, avoiding neighborhood events and community functions. Zack, once proud of his fast car and faster attitude, had his state university scholarship revoked after the viral video made its way to the admissions office. The school cited a breach of their code of conduct regarding integrity and behavior. It wasn't Damon who had sent the video, but the truth has a way of traveling on its own. Surprisingly, a few days later, Damon received a short, sincere email from Lily. She apologized for staying silent longer than she should have and thanked him for not pressing charges against Zack. She admitted she had learned more in one afternoon than any school or lecture had ever taught her about privilege, perception, and consequences. As for the neighborhood, things slowly began to shift. Neighbors who had once offered only polite nods at best now stopped to introduce themselves, shake his hand, or drop off baked goods as gestures of goodwill. One even admitted, "I didn't realize how complicit I'd been in just standing by." "Thank you for waking us up." Damon never asked for their approval, but now that it came honestly, it meant something. Racism doesn't always wear a white hood or shout slurs. Sometimes it hides behind neatly trimmed hedges, HOA rulebooks, and quiet assumptions about who belongs where. It can live in the way a gate code is shared with some but not others, or in how a teenage boy feels entitled to claim ownership of a pool simply because he always had access to it. But Damon Price didn't fight back with anger, threats, or outrage. He fought with facts, with proof, with the calm resolve of someone who has lived long enough to know that real change doesn't come from yelling louder. It comes from standing firmer. His decision to stay composed, to call for backup instead of retaliation, and to use the system rather than bypass it, ultimately held up a mirror to an entire neighborhood. It forced them to confront the bias they didn't want to admit, and to reckon with the ways they allowed it to persist. True power isn't measured by how loudly you respond to injustice, but by how unshakably you defend the truth when it arrives. Damon's story reminds us that sometimes the most radical thing you can do is not walk away. It's to stay exactly where you are, with every right to be there, and make sure the people who tried to erase you are forced to see you, and everything they tried to ignore. Change isn't always immediate, it isn't always loud, but when it's rooted in principle, documented in truth, and carried out with grace, it lasts. Thank you for watching this powerful story of justice, dignity, and quiet strength. At X Daily Stories, we believe that every voice matters, and that standing your ground with truth can shake even the strongest walls of prejudice. If stories like Damon Price's moved you, inspired you, or made you reflect, don't forget to subscribe to our channel. We post new stories every day, not every week. Real moments, powerful lessons, and narratives that speak truth to power. Hit that subscribe button, turn on the notification bell, and become part of a growing community that believes in courage, change, and accountability. Because sometimes the right story at the right time can change everything.